You've probably heard about this thing called Topical Authority, and it's kind of booming in SEO. And well, this is my first video on this channel. You're going to realize who I am. I've got no identity to hide for you, but also too, I have nothing to sell you. So that's just the start, is when you watch all these videos on YouTube, you are pretty much just engaging in somebody else's marketing tactics, telling you things that they think are going to work, basically so you either hire them or purchase one of their services. And let me tell you, I've been in SEO for a very long time. I've grown websites to more than 2 million in monthly page views, and I've also seen them go to absolute zero thanks to Google. And there's a lot of these thoughts, ideas, premises that tools and things work, and we're going to get into all that in this channel hopefully. But the first one is Topical Authority. If you want to know about whether these tools like Surfer SEO still work, a little bit of a tip here: they used to, but they don't anymore. We can get into that as well in other videos. This is going to be very raw. This is a single cut video, so I'm going to go quick. I'm going to show you things that do work, that don't work. Anyway, if you're here, you already know what Topical Authority is. It's this idea that if you publish more content around your specific niche, that Google will appreciate you for it. Well, guess what? That's actually not very true anymore. And in fact, thanks to the most recent helpful content update that happened just in this past September and October, as well as last year, it pretty much goes to show that you cannot do this anymore. That it actually shows that you're not a very good website by simply having one topic that you're talking about and it not having any bleed into other content types. And so we're going to get into that. So basically, if you're here, you know what Topical Authority is. You've already been looking it up. You've probably read articles like this and spent your whole 10 minutes reading about these articles. It's this idea that, hey, I can talk about protein. Protein. What is protein? What does protein powder do? What is the best protein powder? And these are all supposed to be different articles, or sometimes they're supposed to be different FAQs that go inside the article. And that just is kind of a little interesting, right? Is that how you've ever found content when you're looking things up? No, I mean, I'm going to go into that as well. But basically, when you search Google, there's one thing that you do, and that's searching Google for a very particular answer. Google gives you that very particular answer back, and that is the way that it is going now. It is going into single short form answers, and that's not really these long, extraneous articles like this. So let's just look at some examples, though, of people that have said that they've kind of done Topical Authority, but maybe not really. So here's one website. It's called Ink for All. So again, you're going to be able to see my name. I know some of these people, have had conversations with them, so I'm not bashing them at all. I don't want to do that on this channel. I don't want to bash people, but I do want to get into some truths. And the first thing to note here is basically their history. So when we look at their history, what we can see is a website that's, number one, been around for a while. It's baked since basically 2020. So we're talking 3, maybe even 4 years at this point, which is really key to think about. The first thing to note here is when you go back in history, which you may not have this within your Ahrefs tool. Some of these services actually don't allow you to go back this far. I have a legacy version of Ahrefs, so I fortunately can. But going back this far gives you a lot of insights. So the first insights that you can glean here is basically that they sat on having very kind of little traffic, 186,000 in monthly traffic, for a number of years, really. So it was almost like 1, maybe 2 years before they really started scaling their content. And that's really key, because if you're Google, if you're trying to prevent AI content, one thing that you're going to be trying to do is actually look at content velocity and making sure that basically your traffic that's been coming in and the amount of pages that you've published are kind of relevant to each other. So that's one way that Google's basically stopping people from getting into this kind of AI content, Topical Authority, domination, all this sort of idea that's been kind of circulating around the internet. You have to really look at some of these sites, and what you notice is that, you know, they've kind of paid their dues for a majority of the way. You can also see they had a pretty good domain rating for a long time. They didn't really scale up their link building. They kind of did that in the beginning, and then they kind of sat on it for a while. So there's actually some implied trust on the domain before they started scaling it up. So whether it's AI content or not, we'll get into that in other videos, because I actually don't think AI content works, and I will go ahead and prove it to you in any number of different ways. But what you can see is that they started scaling up their content here, and that's actually got them a lot of traffic. They've done a fantastic job with that, and only most recently kind of taken a dip. Note, though, pretty much everybody has taken a dip from the helpful content update that just happened, so I don't say that that's a bad thing. I don't know too many people, unless you're a major brand that got a lot of traffic. Again, we'll go into that in other videos. videos if you want to know kind of how to prevent yourself from further Google updates. But what we can see is we can see a ton of traffic here, right? So you should punch in this domain into Ahrefs. Learn from this domain. This is a great domain to learn from, and what they did not do. But what you can see is when we break it down into what my favorite is going into top pages. This gives us a better idea of what kind of content that they published and what they're doing with their content. And what you can see is basically what you would say is not topical authority domination. They would maybe suggest that it is if you're talking to these folks who've made this website, but it's actually not. It's not topical authority in the sense of what we think of it as. So here's some examples. So we've got Happy New Year. If you were to dig into this content, what you're going to find is that the content is about different sayings around Happy New Year. So you're going to have this, which is different ways to say Happy New Year. And that's fantastic. That's just more, I wouldn't call it grammar. I would just say general English and things like that are more related to folks who are just looking for ideas, right? So ideas and inspiration. You can see that pop up even more. You've got these types of content, which is really, now we get into grammar and English, and that's a whole niche in itself, right? But now you have different things like this, LMAO meaning, which is not really totally grammar. It's more of a definition. So you can say that that's grammar, you can say that that's not, but that's going to start to bleed. And this is just an example of kind of how it starts to bleed. Now you see bleeds like this. Thank you messages, right, which are totally different. These are, they're calling it AI content that you can copy and paste kind of. And this is why you should write a thank you note to your boyfriend, different thank you note ideas. And these are just like more content ideas that you could copy and paste basically. So if you're sending a text message or something, and that's super cool, right? These are somewhat related if you think about them, but they're not related in the same sense that topical authority is talking about. Because if you go back up into here and you would say, hey, what is protein? What is the best protein powder, etc., you would probably write an article about LMAO meaning, how to use LMAO, all sorts of different things like that. But they're not really doing that. They're kind of doing a one and done, best for the intent of the search, which is what we'll get into in a second here. So let's just go through some more of the content. It's really important to break this down and to look through it. And what we can see is that there's just basically a lot of stuff that's not super related to each other. You might think that it is, but it's actually not. And there's a lot of details that people go into about whether or not this is related to Google's kind of LLM models and how that might play a role, but it's really not exactly related. We have a lot of sayings and stuff like that, and that's great. Cleaning service slogans as an example. I mean, that's not really related to any of these other pieces of content, is it? These are now model generators, which is just not really the same. So you have just basically a bunch of content that is kind of related, but it's really not related. And it's performed just fine. The website's performed just fine. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to make here, is that you have a website here, and I can give you more examples, but I'm just going to go ahead and dig into this one because this one is just such a great example where, yes, there is somewhat of an idea of what the website is about. And I think that's great. You do need to have somewhat of an idea. If you're going to be talking about gaming and then you're going to be talking about medical advice, of course, that's not going to work. But when you're talking about non-YMYL categories, basically you do have a lot of wiggle room, especially if you have a high domain rating, which is what we should go into. So when you look at specific topics, for example, you have to understand that every single keyword niche has its own dynamics that are being considered for its rankings, right? So when you look at a keyword, you have to start from the top level of the keyword, and you have to understand the players that are there and what factors are going into it. So if we scroll through here, what we can see for inspirational quotes as an example is that essentially it's ranked by the domain rating. No matter what you do, it is kind of ranked by the domain rating. We have, sure, maybe there's some wiggle room where the content and the number of images that are on the page and different things like that are kind of playing a factor. But at the end of the day, unless you're good housekeeping, unless you're Brainy Quote that's been around for a while, or a website that has a 90 DR rating, you're pretty much not going to be in the inspirational quotes category. You should just not spend your time doing this. And that's just because the factors that are there underneath that niche is going to play a major role. And you sure could find untapped keywords underneath that umbrella of quotes as a niche, but you know, you're really going to be chasing after some really low search volume items, and basically, you know, you're going to be spending a lot of time, even when you're doing it with AI content, trying to find very low search term or low search competition terms that aren't really going to give you a bunch of traffic, and that's not really going to make you a bunch of money, especially when you're talking about quotes, which is primarily based on display ads. There's nothing going to be there that people are going to buy. So let's look at another one. So this is just crossword clues. So I'm giving you some further niche ideas, but basically crossword clues is a huge category, but it's very hard to break into. And the reason for this is because, well, it's number one, it is a little bit ranked by domain rating, but when you dig into it, what you'll really find is that a lot of these niche sites aren't really basically just publishing content. Here, I'll explain it to you. Let's jump into a couple of these websites. If you jump into one like this, Try Hard Guides as an example, they publish every single night. So it's essentially who is the first to get to this particular keyword. So think of it as someone who's publishing news. So if they're publishing news, it's the first person to break the news. So when you're looking at these niches and you're looking at them just through the lens of Ahrefs, you really have to go much deeper into your analyses to understand what's happening within that particular niche and how Google is comprehending that niche. And it's not the tools and the things that people are talking about in a lot of these articles or videos, which is why I'm making the video. So let's say crossword clues here. All you have to do is really investigate. So take the time, once you found your keyword idea or your keyword area and you think there's a way to compete in there, you have to understand that it's more than just links. It's more than just content. There could be different mechanisms that are taking place that are making it so people are ranking. And as they do that over time, they start to build a little bit of trust with Google. In this case, it's the first person to publish the answers for crossword clues. And I'll explain to you. So in this one, you can see it's at basically midnight. So midnight every single day, the content is published. Most likely this is some type of automated system that does it, and that's totally cool. And so once you create your automated system, you're basically just going to have the same thing as them, and you need to really think creatively about how you're getting your content to market. So when you're looking at Ahrefs, all you can do is just look at domain rating and all that sort of stuff. And, oh, yeah, I'm going to look at topical authority. That's not the only thing that you need to look at. You need to also look at how long that domain has been around, how much trust that it's inherently built, regardless of domain rating, about talking about that subject matter for how many years that it's been around doing it. Understand that they're basically first person to market, right? So if they're one of the domains that started the idea of crossword clues or started the idea of quotes, like Brainy Quote is, these are kind of like leaders in the category that you will never be able to compete with no matter how many links that you build. And that's because they've just been around longer talking about that particular subject matter. And yes, you could build better quality content than them, and that can definitely get you some traffic. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that is a factor that you will never be able to compete with. Much similar to Good Housekeeping, Parade.com, all these other websites that we see, these are pretty major brands that have been around for 10 years plus. And so when you start a website, if you're thinking about SEO, you have to understand that you have to break into something new that there is very low competition into, and finding those is pretty hard, and oftentimes they're not within Ahrefs because there's not a whole lot of search traffic that's been already recorded. Understand that search keyword volume is something that's been recorded for a long period of time. So in essence, it's a lagging indicator of search intent, and you need to get in front of things like maybe, I don't know, using TikTok or some other tools to help you understand trends that are happening and getting in front of those trends before they become kind of consistent. And so you're sort of asking yourself, you're like, okay, well, when we're talking about topical authority, so that's what I need to do. I just need to publish a bunch of content and I will dominate and win. And the answer is actually no. In a lot of these cases, you do have to kind of find more emerging topics that you need to get into, and there is a gamble there that those emerging topics become evergreen. Evergreen is this idea that people will consistently search for them over time, and that will become something that they use Google for, rather than just using Google one single time. So, should you be spending your time on topical authority? I mean, yes and no. I mean, you do need to kind of understand that there are particular topics that I think are relevant to each other and present different opportunities. But when we look at pieces of content like this, what you're going to see is that there's actually not a whole lot of internal linking. There's not even a single there's not even a single external link that's on this website. There's only 2 internal links, and it's ranking just fine. And that doesn't really go with a lot of what we've said for topical authority, right? That kind of goes against it, because in essence, what we're saying is that you actually don't need a bunch of internal links kind of clustering all of these things together. I can give you more website examples, but I think, again, this one's the best one. Does topical authority work? Sure, it may work. It may certainly work, but I also don't know how many times have you actually visited a website and then clicked through on some of those internal links. That doesn't really happen as much as you might think. You're usually getting your one single answer and either leaving Google, or you're not getting your single answer and you're going back out of Google, which is primarily what this helpful content update was about, was using engagement signals like that to rank content, right? They're seeing of whether or not somebody on their mobile phone got their question answered, and if they did, they usually just leave the entire Google experience. They don't go back, they don't bounce, which you have bounce rate within your Google Analytics, and that's kind of what they're looking at now, which is very similar to YouTube indicators and things like that. Okay, so topical authority, should you be spending time on it? Should you be building these topical maps? Should you be doing all this stuff? I mean, yes, you do kind of need to know what you're going to be publishing about, but I also want to draw some really, really important attention to this, is if you go deep into these pages, you can see this is actually like an estimated estimated traffic that's here, which is around 170, right? So basically you have a bunch of really, really low trafficked pages, which in reality, you can kind of look at these charts and you can say, well, maybe they're getting all this traffic, yes, and usually what you'll see is a bunch of people posting these charts in particular, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually how many people are coming to the website, because these are just projections, right? And when you have hundreds of thousands of pages, that's not the case in here, they've only got about 6,000, that are only getting, 5 estimated clicks per month. I mean, that's where your kind of traffic figures are coming from, and that's where your fat graphs are coming from, and people are selling you on all sorts of stuff. So don't fall into that trap. You actually need to find real content and real traffic that is ranking, where real people are evergreen searching for it every single month. And let me tell you, it's extremely hard right now because tons of people are just piling into this, and that's why Google's making a lot of changes, typically around domain rating. So what you're going to see is domain rating being really heavily introduced right now, and history and trust of the website, which is just really not about your EEAT signals. It's really just about how long those brands have been around and using that as a signal for trust. And it's not just some of these other things that you want to mention in some of these articles. So if you have questions, put them in the comments. What I will do is I will answer every single question with authenticity, right? I will help you with your questions no matter what. And if you have further questions, maybe that will introduce more videos. If anybody even watches this one, I don't even know if they will. But I am going to disprove a lot of the SEO myths that are out there, a lot of the stuff that you're getting sold on. Okay, thanks. Like and subscribe.